Tonight, I will be telling some true horror stories from around the internet. Stories of stalkers, crazy neighbors, and more. These are real encounters involving real people, so this is a fair warning that these topics could be triggering to some. If you have a story you'd like to have shared with the channel, it can be submitted to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. Stay safe out there, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I recently received a friend request that reminded me of this story, so I'm going to share it here. This happened after I went to university, so I was 18. I made an effort to make friends after I moved onto campus, and ended up with a few groups to hang out with, including a new girlfriend and plenty of people from my classes that I liked well enough. There was one class before lunch where it was traditional for people to go to the cafeteria afterwards to eat in pairs or threes. I wasn't very discerning about who I'd have lunch with because I got on fine with most people from the class, and we were all trying to make an effort to be social. So when one girl, Lily, asked if I wanted to eat lunch together after that class, I didn't have any reason not to go. We talked about school and that kind of thing. Nothing noteworthy. But she did ask me to get lunch with her again the next week. It became a pattern, and there wasn't exactly a way to start saying no suddenly. It was fine, but it did mean I lost the chance to eat lunch with anyone else on those days. In hindsight, I suppose that was the point. One day in class, I asked someone if I could add them on social media. This happened in front of Lily. I saw her face jerk towards me from a couple of seats over. It was such a sharp reaction that it was hard to ignore, and I still remember it. By the time I got home later that day, Lily had sent me a friend request. No friends in common. Don't know how she knew my last name. I was a bit surprised, but I guess she just dug through the university's social media pages and found me through there. It gave me a bad feeling, but surely it was fine. She ended up messaging me a lot and commenting on anything I posted. I told myself that she was just awkward, and we became friends. If not close. I'd known worse people. She still always got me to eat lunch with her after our one shared class. Other than that, we rarely spent time together in person. I saw her around sometimes, but I never went out of my way to hang out with her. So it was mostly online messaging and seeing each other in group settings. Coincidentally, my girlfriend was also called Lily. This was something that clearly bothered Lily, not my girlfriend, who couldn't have found it less interesting. It's a common name. She occasionally hinted that she wanted my girlfriend to pick a different name, or joked about her not suiting it. She clearly didn't like my girlfriend at all, and I had no idea of why. It was hard to ignore by this point. Lily was starting to subtly hint that she had a crush on me. I tried not to address it because what was I going to say? I've never known what to do when a friend makes a pass at me. I was also not interested in the least. Even ignoring the weird stuff she pulled, Lily was not my type at all. She tended to dress and act in a way somewhere between a 50s housewife and one of those adults who is still obsessed with Disney princesses, if you can picture that. Things took an uncomfortable turn on the day of our last shared class of the year. Instead of asking me to lunch like she usually did, Lily asked if I'd go for a walk with her. Again, I didn't exactly know how to refuse, so I said alright. Our campus was bordered by a large patch of woodland. Lily led me into the woods, and the sounds of our fellow students slowly faded away. She sat down on a log, and I joined her. She started talking about how she was going to miss me over the summer. I tried placating her, but I didn't want to be there, especially because she seemed almost on the verge of tears. I think I tried to make an excuse about having plans with my girlfriend, but before I could leave, Lily chose to kiss me without warning. It was uncomfortable to say the least. I got out of there, and was happy to think I wouldn't see her for a while. I came back to university after the summer, moving into a house with my friends. Without going off topic, there were some serious issues in my friend group. A lot of petty arguing, and worse. I broke up with my girlfriend around the start of that year as well. And basically the whole mess made me recontextualize things with Lily because it suddenly didn't seem as bad. That said, I didn't want to be alone with her. We mostly talked online. She was still constantly messaging me after all. One upside of everything was that I started dating a boy. Lily was not pleased to hear that news. I think she hoped to sneak in after I broke up with my girlfriend, but as I said before, that was never going to happen. There wasn't a big gap between my breakup and this new relationship, so she must have thought she'd missed her chance to be with me. This is where the story gets bad. At this time, I was fairly active on Tumblr. I occasionally talked about my life and mostly reblogged photos and stuff. I was on there one day when something odd happened. One of the blogs I followed had received an ask with some phrases I recognized. It took a second to register that it was taken from my About page. That made me realize I read the message properly. Someone was asking this completely random person to analyze a section of text from my page, asking for their opinion on the type of person who would write in. I cannot stress how messed up it was to see people talking about me like I was a character in a book they were trying to study. The reply was basically, I don't know, sorry. But the important thing was that the question hadn't been anonymous. It linked to someone's blog. Obviously, I wanted to know who had taken such a bizarre interest in me. As far as I knew, no one in real life, other than my boyfriend, knew about my page. Well, no prizes for guessing who was behind it. What I found was like a shrine. She was using a fake name, but I recognized Lily all over that thing. It was this cutesy, pink and red page. There were a few posts about her interest, but most of the content was focused on her primary interest, me. Most of the posts were about me. There were accounts of things I'd done recently. He told me about such and such, he went to a nightclub recently, etc. As well as references to things from as far back as I'd known her. It was clear she'd been keeping tabs on me, both online and offline, gathering up every scrap of information she could about my life and hoarding it here in her collection. She talked about us eating lunch together and how special our dates had been to her, as if it was anything more than acquaintances getting food after class. She talked about the time she had forcibly kissed me in the woods, but she wrote it as if it had been mutual. She quoted lyrics from my favorite song and talked about how she'd always be there for me, no matter who else came into my life. Lots of references to loving me just the way he is. Which answered another mystery about an anonymous love letter I'd received earlier that year with the same wording. It got worse. There were a lot of posts about my boyfriend as well. These weren't so nice. They got vicious, talking about how he didn't deserve me. He didn't know what he had. If she was with me, she'd be jealous of anyone else who came near me. So my boyfriend not being a jealous person meant he didn't love me. It was angry and hateful. I didn't like to think about the sort of person who could write so obsessively about fixating on me. One thing that didn't make sense at first was that the blog also made plenty of references to Lily's best friend Steven. She had never mentioned this person to me. Her post talked a lot about Steven and how great of a friend he was, and how much fun they had together, how he looked out for her, etc. I was trying to work out whether this was an online friend when one specific post made it all click. She had posted a photo and captioned it with, "Steven sent this to me. He knew I would like it, and I love it," or something like that. The problem was the photo was taken from my own page. I hadn't sent it to her. She took it from my page and then claimed this fictional best friend of hers shared it with her. Because in her head, she'd split me into two people. In her messed up fantasy life, I was both the perfect best friend who was always looking out for her, and her soulmate who was bound to end up with her when I finally got over my sweet, kind boyfriend and all the other easy girls I hung out with that she made dozens of posts complaining about. It Who was she complaining to? Oh, Lily had an audience. She asked open questions about me and her relationship with me and got messages back from her followers. People who took what she said at face value. I saw a bunch of random people agreeing with this stalker that my boyfriend didn't deserve me, and we were bound to break up soon so I could be with Lily. The person I was clearly supposed to be with. She had this fake, fan-fiction version of my life up for anyone to share their opinion on, and she'd made herself out to be the hero of it all. I went maybe a month back into the page's history. I did not look at everything that was there. It was too much. So I'm not sure how long this had been going on. I sent Lily a message confronting her about the blog. She said nothing, and I cannot stress how weird it was to have found pages and pages dedicated to me, with her talking about how she was in love with me and would make sure we ended up together, slamming my boyfriend and building a fantasy life with two different versions of me and that she clearly believed to be real, then acting like it hadn't happened. She said nothing. She didn't address it. She just changed the topic, even after I pushed, and it was like she hadn't even registered what I said. I've never seen anything else like it. She deleted the page, of course, or at least changed the name and hid it so I never found it again. It wasn't the end, though. I wasn't going to hang out with her anymore, but we were still shoved together in classes and she had started to actually scare me with what she might do next. I'm kind of a paranoid person. Knowing someone was obsessively keeping track of me for who knows how long freaked me out. The next thing she pulled was trying to seduce my boyfriend. It was an absolutely useless attempt that only made him uncomfortable. He told me about it right away. What was her plan there? Did she hope to tell me he cheated and wait for me to break up with him? Why would I want her after that? When that didn't work out for her, she tried hitting on 3 of my other friends. None of them took the bait. She ended up dating one of my former housemates for a while, but made sure to send me messages while they were together letting me know she'd rather be with me. No thanks. Lily made sure to stay in my life the whole time I was at university. There was a time when I tried to pull away from her, and she ended up starting rumors about me and damaging a career opportunity I'd put a lot of work into. I don't know what else she did behind my back, but it made me realize it was safer to let her think she was part of my life while ignoring her, rather than doing something that would cause her to get angry. After I graduated, Lily still wanted to spend time together, but I knew I didn't have to now. I made excuses about work and barely talked to her after that point. I almost entirely stopped posting on social media that I knew she knew about. Of course, she didn't give up that easily. She tried to start conversations, asked me to meet up with her, attempts I usually ignored. I didn't like to think she was still tracking me online, but she probably was. I don't know how, but she'd occasionally reference things I mentioned online somewhere she shouldn't have known about. The last time we had a real conversation, she sent me a message out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken at all in months, and we hadn't talked about anything serious in much longer than that. Thinking about that conversation still makes my skin crawl, but I'll summarize what happened. At first, she asked me some questions about how long I had known I was queer. I told her some basic stuff, the kind of stuff I'd tell anyone who asked. Then she changed the subject. She started talking about how I would feel about her if she was a boy, about wanting to be a boy for me. The messages quickly became fetishistic, and she went into plenty of detail about fantasies she had of the two of us. Again, we were not friends at this point. We'd never been especially close, at least not from my perspective, and we had barely spoken for years. I can't imagine sending messages like that to even a close friend, let alone someone who barely knows you. I tried telling her not to pull this crap with me, but she decided to change tactics. She sent photos of herself, followed by a bunch of messages, maybe 4 or 5 a minute, way too fast for me to reply before the next one arrived, basically quoting back what I'd told her about myself and my past earlier. She was telling me these things as if they had happened to her. She was role-playing as me. The worst part was that she seemed to believe it was real, that those things actually had happened to her. Even when she was quoting me word for word. Things I'd told her only hours before were now her life. It was like she was trying to absorb my history, to take it over, to make my life part of her. Yeah, I didn't talk to her again after that. I ignored future attempts she made to talk to me, and I eventually silently deleted her from all the inactive social media, which was her only real way of contacting me. I really thought she might finally move on. A few days ago, she sent me a friend request. It's sitting there unanswered, because I know if I delete it, she'll only send another one. Lily and I met nearly 12 years ago. This story is just the highlights, and even then, it's only the stuff I know about for sure. A lot happened behind my back. I know it did. So, girl who spent 12 years obsessing over me, fetishizing me, stalking me, and harassing me. Let's not meet again. The fantasy life you built for the two of us in your head is the only place you'll be seeing me anytime soon. This story takes place in November 2017. I was 18. I'm a very short girl, only 4'10", and I get anxious when someone even looks at me in a way to suggest they might not like me. So needless to say, I'm incredibly non-confrontational. My friend and I were out shopping. It was something we'd do maybe every few months just to bond since we didn't have much time to hang out due to college. She's just like me. Barely scrapes, 5'1", and very non-confrontational. It's probably why we became friends. On every shopping trip, we would find ourselves in Ann Summers. We're both overly endowed and struggled to find bras anywhere use. And Ann Summers always had great sales, so we'd grab at the cheap bras while we could. This shopping trip wasn't any different. We browsed shops until we got to Ann Summers. And that's when things took a bit of a turn. I'd barely stepped foot into the shop when a woman with some sort of Slavic accent stopped me. Her finger jammed into my chest. "Spit the gum out," she demanded. Assuming she was an employee, I gave a very sheepish, "I'm really sorry," and ran out of the shop to spit the gum out and throw it away. When I went back in, I realized that this woman was not an employee. She was a customer who was browsing and happened to be near the door when my friend and I entered the shop. It should have been obvious to me at the time. No salesperson would behave like that. Not one that wanted to keep their job anyway. But I kept my head down when I walked past her, holding my breath in hopes she wouldn't notice me again. She didn't, and I thought I was in the clear. My friend and I browsed the shop, trying to avoid the woman, but the shop wasn't very big. Probably only 15 feet by about 18 feet. So eventually I ended up at the sales stand by the door where she had been stood. I tried to keep my distance while browsing. I was looking at the price tags but realized I didn't know what the discount was, so I leaned over slightly to check the discount sign. It's probably important that I note that this woman had a pushchair, which is a stroller for the Americans. You'd think that maybe she had a child in this pushchair, but no. It was full of plastic carrier bags. I didn't look too much at it, but I could tell that everything in there was double bagged and tied shut. Whatever was in those bags, she wanted to protect. This sense of protection became very relevant because when I leaned over to look at the discount sign, I was leaning slightly closer to her pushchair. I was still about 3 feet away from it, but apparently this was too close. The woman was on the other side of the chair, but the moment she saw me, she ran around to where I was stood. She hit me in the face. It was something between a slap and a punch. I couldn't quite tell because I was in shock. All I knew is that it hurt. "Watch the personal space," she hissed in my ear. I apologized to her. This woman just hit me and I apologized to her. I regret it now, but at the time, I didn't want to provoke her any further. Not that I knew what I did to provoke her in the first place. In shock, I turned around and ran back to the back area, grabbing my friend's hand and pulling her with me. The back area was separated by a tiny wall that only stretched halfway across the shop since they stored the adult toys there and wanted to keep them out of sight of the general public. I stood there holding my friend's hand and shaking as I whispered, "She just hit me," to my friend. We stood there for a good moment in silence. My friend was positioned in a way that she could see the rest of the store while I hid behind the wall. "She's gone," my friend told me. I let out a breath that I didn't know I was holding. "Can we stay in here for a while?" I asked my friend, worried that the woman would be outside waiting for me. The front of the store was open, but she could have easily just been a couple feet down the road and out of sight, waiting for me to leave. My friend agreed and we slowly browsed the shop again. About 5 minutes later, we got to the counter to check out. The girl working the counter looked outside and then back at us. That woman had been in here for 30 minutes. I didn't know what to do. She told the two of us. "What did she say to you?" "She told me to spit out my gum when we first came in, and then she hit me because I was too close to her." I told her. "Wait, she hit you?" The worker was wide-eyed. "If I had known that, I would have called security. I'm so sorry." I smiled and shrugged. "It's fine." It wasn't really fine, but it wasn't the worker's fault. She didn't look much older like I did, and I wouldn't have known what to do in that situation either. Still shaken up, my friend and I made our way out of the store. I looked around but didn't see the woman. "Can we go home now?" I asked my friend. We hadn't finished browsing all of the shops, but I was so paranoid that we'd bump into the woman again. She agreed and we got the bus home. When I got home, my parents encouraged me to report the incident to the police. I called the non-emergency line and their answer was basically, "Well, what do you expect us to do about it?" Unless I went back to the Ann Summers and requested the security footage, which I wasn't sure if they actually had. It wouldn't do anything. It's been just over 3 years and now I'm sure that the woman was likely to have been homeless and/or on drugs. It's the only explanation that I can think of for the carrier bags and her protectiveness. It was either everything she owned, or drugs, or both. I consider most of 1996 to be a rebuilding year in my life. I was 25 years old, fresh out of a relationship that crashed and burned right before the wedding. So deep was the crater and widespread fallout that I had to move to a different state to avoid my to-be father-in-law's friends in law enforcement, who were making sure I spent some roadside with them at least 4 times in the first 2 months after it all ended. I started over in a new place with a lack of resources and connections that were going to make it hard to get back into shape before I turned 30. Still, I was free and beholden to no one but my creditors. So I had that going for me. I lived in my means and rented a townhouse in a long row of properties in a less than reputable part of town. I didn't have time to do a walkthrough before I moved in. In fact, I rented the place on scene based on the online ad. It was close to the job, which was great because someone trashed my car the week before I moved out, and I ended up driving a beat-up Dodge pickup that I bought with the last of my savings. Once settled, I was locked into the rental for 12 months, which oddly enough gave me a sense of permanence in my new surroundings and helped me get to work on my new life and career in human capital management and training services. My unit was at the end of the block of 12 with 2 bedrooms up top with a master bath and a half bath in the living area. It was not a massive space, but it felt empty for lack of any furniture. I slept on an inflatable mattress my first 3 months and used folding chairs and a card table to eat and watch television. The block was a place where people were either on their way up or back down. Young kids in their first home, recently divorced with kids, the downturned from society in one way or another. There were fights, domestic and otherwise, throughout the night. Drunken parties and birthday galas took over the block on weekends, but nobody ever interacted with other families for some reason. No one knew anyone else's name or business. At least that's what the cops told me the first time they stopped by to ask me if I heard or witnessed something going on in the block. My immediate neighbors were just weird. Like a space monkey on your lawn inviting you to an anal probe kind of weird. It was a circus of 3. The short, wild-haired woman looked like an off-brand troll doll with a big pink hair that defied logic and a malfunctioning soundboard that only shrieked when provoked. The tall, thin man looked like an average bald human might appear in an elongating funhouse mirror. I don't know how old they were, but they resembled old, well-worn furniture, like the contents of an elderly couple's storage locker, old and ready to be discarded. Troll doll lady and funhouse man were not fond of talking to strangers or anyone. They were troubled people. Their fights would bleed through the shared walls and get louder when talking outside. They knocked my only hanging art from the wall when one threw the other against the other side. Funhouse man liked to take his morning coffee in the sunshine, standing behind the screen of his front door in tidy whities and an oversized flannel shirt. He was often the first person I'd encounter in the morning on my way to work, and he would stare off across the playground into the woods, as if in a trance long before I left the townhouse and probably long after my truck took me away. The cops knew them by their real names. There had been a child living there, but he or she had been removed from the house. A frequent guest in their little David Lynch sitcom world was a guy named Chuck. So named because Troll Doll Lady would yell his name every 10 fucking minutes anytime he was in the house. Chuck was a long-haul trucker who parked his sleeper rig across the street every couple of weeks. For some reason, he didn't shower inside. So Saturday mornings, he would often run the garden hose over the fenced-in area in the back to take a cold shower, which was a lovely sight the first time I didn't know what was going on. He sometimes walked out back to take a long beer piss in the runoff drain. His aversion to indoor plumbing was never explained to me, but I am forever grateful I never walked out back to catch him popping a squat in the tree line. For about 6 months, I tolerated the noise. Let the neighbors be the bad guys and call the police when the fight went too loud for too long, or when they all got drunk and played their 80s punk records through the night and engaged in the song of their people howling at the moon. I got to a place where I was making enough money to buy real furniture or rent a better place. I still had a lease to honor, so I bought a sofa, a real bed, and a desk set for an office. It was still a minimalist affair, but comfortable. The townhouse felt more like my home for once, and suddenly the intrusions from the neighbors were twice as annoying. One night, Troll Doll Lady got into a fight with a pizza delivery driver who knocked on her door by mistake, but wouldn't give her the pizza. I only know this because the pizza and its box hit my front window at different spots. This shrieking pink-haired witch assaulted the driver, which led to a light show by police that rivaled a Mannheim Steamroller Christmas show. I was left to clean the pizza off the window and call the office to replace the window. They refused until the neighbors agreed to pay, so I enjoyed a cracked window for a month before the court accepted her guilty plea over the property damage. Her arrest was around the same time residents on our block, and the next one over began reporting burglaries, and I was asked by police if I had any information or experienced anything odd. Other than the 3 geek circus next door, I told them I did not. Fortunately, my work and social life were on the rebound. I met a girl and we hit it off. Though we stayed far from my house during the early part of our relationship, so I began spending more time away from home, though I would often come home late to the neighbors in a loud state of either bliss or rage. During the day, maintenance worked to replace the insulation and update the HVAC system along the attic spaces along the entire block. I didn't think much about it because the work was done while I was gone in the daytime, and I assumed the property managers would be coming into my place at some point to access my attic. Probably the last one, as they stayed on the far end from mine. Quickly, I lost track of the project. One night, I came home and something felt a little off. The front door was locked, the windows intact, and the back door was secured. However, it felt and even smelled a little off. Sometimes I could smell the tobacco and weed upstairs when it filtered up and over the attic space, but I was sure someone had been there. I cleared the house in a short, quiet march, as my dad, a Marine, taught me. but found no one and nothing missing. My computer, 2 TVs, everything was intact. Except... I went to grab a beer from the fridge to calm my nerves and found a 6-pack missing. I was sure I had 2 scratch batch stout packs from my last visit to Stewie's microbrew. The loaf of bread seemed to be a little shorter than the morning before, by several slices. I couldn't be sure, but I thought I might be missing some other items as well, but wasn't sure if that was just the growing anxiety over being robbed. I wondered if maintenance had been by to inspect the window or work in the attic and help themselves to a snack and drinks. It would explain the musty smell in my apartment, and given the people I knew who owned and managed the property, it would not surprise me if a couple of their day laborers took a load off for a bit. The smell was the most present upstairs, but in my office, which was opposite the neighbor's wall, so it wasn't lingering dank. It was clearly gym funk. I immediately assumed laborer, because it made the most sense, so I didn't report it to police that night. The next morning, however, I discovered my medications missing from my cabinet. All of them. My Lexapro, my emergency anxiety meds, and my other bottles were gone. I checked the windows and doors again, now in a near panic. I called off work for the first time using a burglary as my excuse. I was the 7th house in 2 townhouse blocks to be hit in the past 2 weeks, the 5th in my block, and one of the 5 without signs of forced entry. The police wouldn't tell me much about the other incidents and didn't seem to believe that I locked my doors until I reminded them who I lived next to. By that point, I really didn't want to live in that place anymore. It no longer felt like home. I was sharing it with something I felt lingered in the air around me. There was a feeling of dread, a sense of violation knowing there was someone out there who was inside your life without permission. Once removed, it feels like living in a house without walls. And there was a serial burglar in a neighborhood where the cops traditionally left to work out its own problems and carry away the remains. A week after the break-in, a few things happened to fuck up my world even further. First, Troll Doll Lady returned home and, because she was on house arrest, a welcome party brought out all the freaks Friday night. Second, because I was a dumbass, I had to come home and pick up a few things I needed to spend the weekend with my new girlfriend. As she was already in the truck and we were to be on the highway out of town, so there was no other choice but to bring her home with me. The lot, including my spaces, was filled with what looked like gridlock and a demolition derby, so I had to park a good distance away. Third, she insisted on seeing the inside of my townhouse and take a pee before hitting the road, so I had to introduce her to the freak show next door before even setting foot inside. Fourth, on the way up the walk to the front door, we encountered Funhouse Man in the open doorway, gatekeeper to the drunk dumbassery inside. He was wearing his morning apparel, briefs and a long shirt except with a can of Red Dog instead of coffee in his hand. Fifth, Funhouse Man looked at us coming up the walk and spoke to me for the first time in 7 months. "You tapped at?" I think he said, his wet mouth spitting the words and his dead eyes scoping my girl. I shifted to put myself between them on the walk as we closed in on the door and fished my keys out of my pants. Funhouse Man panicked, letting out a squeal before diving inside and slamming the door. The party went silent instantly. Sixth, my girl was unnerved by this and lost all her thrill over being with me in that place. She walked inside my home and registered her immediate disapproval. She didn't even want to pee there. I remember making some excuses, saying it's a temporary thing and the first step to better living, etc. But it was the beginning of the end for us, like she caught me cheating with Troll Doll Lady. Seventh, I didn't realize the party had spilled out into the front lawn and in front of my townhouse until I opened the door to see Chuck, the trucker, standing under my porch lamp looking drunk, stupid, and angry. He was joined by a few strangers who looked equal parts the same condition, and also like I had just fired the lot of them from the sideshow. I stopped inside the screen door trying to think of anything to say, clever or otherwise. Chuck the trucker started the conversation. "You go at Kenny?" "What?" Shit for brains. I ask if you went after Kenny in his own home. Nothing like that happened. But I knew immediately that my reality was not shared by those gathered in front of my own home. No, he said something. I got closer to hear. He squealed like a little girl and ran inside. End of story. I was okay at the end of the first 2 sentences, but my anger got the best of me by the start of the third, and it did little to calm the group, of which had swollen to about a dozen people looking for blood or things to break. Chuck was not convinced by my answer and took a step forward to open my screen door. He put a hand on the knob and stopped. You step out here, or I come in there. Go take a shit in a tree, asshole. You're not coming in here, and I'm not bleeding over that weirdo friend of yours. You can go beat each other like you normally. Eighth. The word stopped there because Chuck had punched a hole in my screen and tried to get to my face. I fell back and accidentally tackled my now firmly ex-girlfriend. Fortunately, I didn't have much in the way of furniture to break on the way down. The only thing going for me at that moment was the miraculous arrival of police drawn by the parking fiasco and the noise. My face was broken. My newest ex had a bloody nose and a sprained shoulder, and I was out a good $400 in deposits for a weekend that would never happen. In short order, a few important things happened. Chuck went to jail and the charges against him would become the least of his problems. The party turned into story time where partygoers spun the best yarn about how I insulted, assaulted, beat, or did other things to Kenny, the funhouse man. I was questioned about the encounter by police and spent time with an EMT who I totally failed to impress enough to get her number. I was let go as several of the partygoers were arrested for either public drunkenness, disorderly conduct, or outstanding warrants. I'm sure this warmed me to the neighbors and their friends. A weekend companion was rescued from it all by a friend who drove her out of my life forever. You would think 8 things in short order would be enough. I had to continue living next to these fuck-ups for at least 4 more months, and I was going to spend those months terrified by what they might do to my property while I was working at the burglars coming back. However, 9th, I woke the next morning to the neighbors cleaning up from the party. Glass and aluminum, plastic, and cardboard packed 2 full-size bins. Credit where it's due. The fuckers recycled. From my what the fuck position in my bedroom window, I noticed 2 of the bottles stood out from the Keystone, Red Dog, and Milwaukee labels. They were a scratch batch labels from my 6-pack. Now there was a chance that they were brought to the party by a guest with better taste in beer than friends, but that was too much of a coincidence. My brain presented a question I could not answer. Where is the attic access in this townhouse? I just assumed there was one somewhere, but never actually looked or came across it. So how did maintenance get into it? Well, totally unrelated to the beer bottle on a conscious level, my paranoia and cynical nature collaborated on a series of connections. As I looked around the house for a drop that I had missed for months, my brain worked in its weird way to line up facts in such a way that would sound insane if I wrote it all out. I went upstairs. My office was where the funk smell had been most pungent. I looked around again and decided to check the closet. I didn't check it before because there was nothing in it. On the carpet, I noticed a light dusting of drywall and paint flecks. I assumed it was rubbing from the sliding door against the wall, but it concentrated at the side by the wall and not equally along the track. The closet only had hanging shelves on the interior side. Looking up, I expected to see an attic access port, but found a jagged square craved into the drywall ceiling. Maintenance was not exactly flip this shack quality, but I didn't know even if they would use a box cutter to carve a hole in my ceiling, and none of them were skinny enough to fit through that. Funhouse Man was skinny enough to potentially weasel up and down. The scuff mark on the inside wall of the closet was pretty telling. It took a while for the police to make their way over in response to my non-emergency call, but it quickly gathered the interest when the first responding officer reported that everyone missed the first time they did a half-ass search in my home. 3 unmarked cars arrived after the initial squad car. My neighbors were uncharacteristically quiet once the first cruiser rolled up around noon. I offered a folding ladder, and the police looked up into the blistering hot attic. A hole had been cut through the insulation and a spot in the corner wide enough for a small, or slender, person to fit through. I was questioned again downstairs for about an hour before I heard more voices upstairs than I remember going up there. Before I could ask, a familiar face appeared at my door. My landlord, Ahmed, looked concerned and astonished, which was a new expression. And the third after his, "Can I take your money?" and his general resting, "fuck off" face. "What happened?" he asked. "What is going on? Are you alright?" He walked into my home without invitation and up to me on my sofa. I asked him if there's a fix to my cracked window. Everything else happened without my direct involvement. I remained a guest in my own home for most of the day as police took photos and marched up and down my stairs. I learned that my assumption about the attic work was wrong, that workers had to access specific units to get around the firewalls between them. In fact, there were holes in the firewall that allowed workers to enter the roof in one unit and run the entire length of the building. It was a measure that saved time and footsteps, but was a violation of several laws and codes, meaning that Ahmed's life was about to become much more complicated and expensive. These gaps in the firewalls also allowed someone to drill a hole in their own ceiling and run the length of 11 other homes, walking on the same boards laid by the property owners that muffled their presence. Every single unit in that block had a hole similar to the one in my ceiling. Further, at one time the building had been wired for cable through the roof, and holes that had been cut to fish cable into the upstairs bedrooms had been plunged up years earlier during an upgrade. Some of those patches had been replaced with removable plugs, giving someone a clear view into various bedrooms. In the attic, police found a step stool with a rope tied to the top step. It was stashed in the corner of the roof over my next-door neighbor's unit. But that's not the weirdest thing. Though all evidence pointed to the main access point being the smaller bedroom in my neighbor's unit, police did not arrest Funhouse Man or Troll Doll Lady for the crime. Around 3 in the afternoon, police had discovered items stolen from other units along with various controlled substances. Troll Doll Lady was arrested for violating the terms of her bond. Funhouse Man was taken in for the drugs. I was shocked to see a third person, not Chuck, walked out of the townhouse in cuffs. I'd never met him before. He was rail thin, thinner than Funhouse Man by half. An old man's face and a young man's body with scars and bruises all over skin that I've only ever seen on corpses, white and waxy. He was naked except for soiled basketball shorts. He literally recoiled as if allergic to outside air and sun and had to be dragged shoeless to the cruiser. I don't know who that kid was, but I got the feeling he never left the townhouse ever. Maybe not even the attic. The thought that this skeletal creep was looking in on me and had access to my life makes me overly cautious these days. I have eyes everywhere in my home and I take pains to inspect the smallest spaces in and around my property. I often wake in the night seeing that face peering at me through a window or from the dark. It's been a long time and everyone I mentioned in this story by name is dead. I don't know about the kid though. I never got a name and I was unable to find him in any police record. Maybe he doesn't really exist. Maybe he didn't show up on any records and is languishing in prison as John Doe. Or maybe he's out there lurking in some upper level of an apartment building or hiding inside the basement or walls. I've rarely ever felt truly home since. This takes place in 2016 and 2017. I was born in the year of 2000, so I was 16 and 17. I worked at a popular chain restaurant as a hostess. We had a high turnover rate, so we constantly had new people working there. The bar was pretty low on who we would hire. Anyway, one day this guy comes in, mid-40s, probably around 5'9", and of average build. He has a small gap between his teeth and emotionless eyes. Dark gray/brown hair, a bit of a comb over. He's wearing a Hawaiian-style button-up shirt and khaki cargo shorts. He asked to talk to the manager, Michael, a good friend of mine. After about 30 minutes of the two talking, the man shakes Michael's hand and leaves. We joke that he looks like the stereotypical serial killer. He had no background to talk about, really. Just that he's from California and he was a male escort. He's having his second interview on Tuesday, so I guess we'll see what happens. Michael says to me, we both made jokes for the next couple of days about the serial killer coworker we were sure we would soon have. Even after he was hired, it was a running joke amongst everyone. His name was John. On the surface, he was okay. Maybe a little inappropriate at times and touchy-feely with the girls, including myself, but everything just said, that's just how he is. He doesn't mean anything by it. I said that too. Looking back, it's weird how we just let him get away with the borderline sexual harassment. I can recall several times that he grabbed me by the waist, called me sexy, even made sexual noises anytime I entered the room. I was around 16. I'd only been working there for about 6 months. I'd become close with most of the staff at that point, even the new guy, John. He was a little weird to everyone, but especially to me. It was like he had some kind of fascination. In the back of my mind, I thought I should stay on his good side, just in case he was as creepy as he acted. So when he invited us all to a barbecue at his house, I went. I didn't want any reason for him to dislike me. Maybe that's because I'm a people pleaser. Or maybe it was the feeling in my gut. It was me, Michael, his girlfriend, their 3 children, and Justin. John told me to get there at 4, so I did, and when I arrived, I realized I was the first one there. I always get to places early, so I figured everyone else would be there soon. He lived in a nice neighborhood, and from what it seemed, he was pretty well off. Nice house, 2 cars, a boat even. I'm greeted by John at the front door and he welcomes me in with a hug. You're here. The others should show up soon. You want to help me cook the burgers? I'm vegetarian, so I have no idea how to do this. He chuckled. We all thought it was weird when he invited us to the barbecue because of the fact that he didn't eat meat. He made that clear at the restaurant when anyone would offer him a boneless wing or a piece of steak. I figured he just wanted an excuse to have some people over. He lived alone after all. He told us that he had a girlfriend in Germany, and he was previously married in California. He had 3 kids. One was an adult at this point, and the other 2 must have been between 4 and 8. I had met his children before when they came to visit him at work. The oldest took care of the 2 younger kids. She was deaf, which I thought was interesting, because I had never met a deaf person before. She seemed like she didn't like John, and only came to see him when she was dropping the 2 young ones to visit him for the weekend. He didn't have custody of either of them, and usually only saw them once every couple of months. Sure, but I'm not a very good cook. I replied, giving him a forced smile. I had never been alone with him before, and I was getting more uncomfortable by the second. First, I should give you a tour. Come on. He grabbed me by the hand and ushered me outside. He had a good-sized backyard. It had a privacy fence, not 1, but 2 small sheds, and a garden. So that's where you dismember people, and you put them in the garden, don't you? I joked, looking back at him. He just smiled. John had caught on to the serial killer jokes at work rather quickly, and he thought it was funny. He would often joke about hiding dead bodies, and I would usually play along. I don't know why I did. I think I really did feel like it was just an inside joke. You got me. Why do you think the veggies grow so well? He had said in a joking voice. While walking towards the garden, ex-wives make excellent fertilizer. After a while, we went back into the kitchen, and he told me to put on an apron. I did because he said it more like an order than a question. You look so sexy in that. Here, let me take a picture to send the girls. You know they love you, right? He pulled out his phone. Smile. At this point, I started to realize that I had been there for at least an hour, and no one else was there yet. I texted a quick text to Michael, asking him when he would be getting here. He replied with, "John told us to be there at 6. Are you already there?" I gulped. Why would he tell me to get there 2 hours before everyone else? "Come sit with me. Sit in this chair." John called from the living room, so I did. He patted the back of the recliner, as to let me know that was my spot. I sat down and he sat down on the couch across from me. I guess now would be a good time to mention that John owned several guns, and he usually had one strapped to his hip. No big deal. This is Texas. It's pretty normal for people to own guns. But he had unstrapped his gun and he was looking at it, toying with it. "Do you want a drink?" he asked, gesturing to the beer in his hand. "No, thank you. I don't really like beer," I replied, probably looking uncomfortable at this point. "I think I'm going to text Michael to hurry up. I've got a 16-year-old girl and a gun." He chuckled as he typed away at his phone. I thought he was joking until Michael texted me, asking me if everything was okay, and saying he would be there soon, so sit tight. About 20 minutes later, everyone had shown up. Michael made it a point to mouth, "Are you okay?" to me, and I nodded. John was just joking after all, right? Night went on. Still weird, but not quite as bad as before. Justin and John made quick work of cooking, and the rest of us sat at the table, including Michael's kids. He had 2 boys and 1 girl, and his girlfriend was named Megan. Soon John had fixed up some cocktails for all of us, even me. I hardly touched it, but when Megan finished hers, she got up to get a refill. This is when it got weird. "Sit down," John demanded, standing up from his spot at the table. She just looked at him confused. "I'm just getting a refill." "I'll get it for you. You are the guest. Sit down." He said a bit more calm than before. He grabbed her cup and went back into the kitchen to fill it up. We all just kind of looked at each other. We made quick work of eating, even though the burgers were almost raw in the middle. At some point, John had started talking about his kids and missing them. That's when he told Michael's daughter to come sit on his lap. She was a sweet little girl, so she did. "I love you," John told her, tearing up. "Say it back." So she did, and he started bawling. He was rambling about being so happy that he had friends, and he wished that we could all just stay there forever. We were all quiet except for Justin, who was totally oblivious to everything going on. He kept munching away at his burgers. As everyone was getting ready to leave, my mom pulled up to come and get me. John quickly pulled us both into one of his sheds, sitting us both down. My mom just looked at me confused. "Thank you so much for letting your daughter be my friend. It means so much to me. I know it's kind of weird since I'm old and she's still a kid, but it makes me so happy." He kept repeating this in different variations for about 10 minutes until my mom said, "Okay, we're leaving now." And we both started heading for the car. Michael and Megan were still there, looking slightly relieved to see us. Later I found out that John had ordered them to wait until he came back to leave. They wanted to leave as soon as he stepped into the shed, but they didn't want to leave us, and Justin had already left. Once they saw us emerge, they got into their car and started strapping the kids into their car seats. John followed me and my mother to our car and stood in the way of the open driver's side door as soon as my mom buckled up. "Please don't leave," he said, still blocking us from closing the door. Eventually, he left after we made up excuses about how it was getting dark and we had to go. Later, I had heard from Michael that John came back from our car and told him and Megan that my mom was crazy and wouldn't let him leave from our car, that she must have been on drugs. A few months later, me and another coworker had planned on seeing a movie after work together. He was also named Michael, but because that's confusing, we'll call him Logan. Logan had been about an hour more of his shift left, and I had decided to wait at one of the empty tables and eat some lunch. As I sat there, John came into the restaurant, presumably to get his check, because we all had to pick up our checks from the manager. He noticed me sitting alone and took the opportunity to sit down next to me. "What are you doing?" he exclaimed with a big smile on his face. "I'm waiting for Logan. We're going to see a movie together after he's finished with his tables." I replied, giving him a forced smile. Why don't you come wait at my house? I'm sure you don't want to stay here any longer than you have to. He leaned in, never taking his eyes off me. It's going to be done soon. I might as well just wait here. I replied, trying to convince him to leave me alone. He didn't leave me alone, and he begged me to come with him. And since I have a hard time saying no to people, I agreed. I let Logan know what was going on. He seemed concerned, but he said, "All right, I'll be there soon." Michael and I had already told Logan about our weird experience with him before, so he knew that John was weird. Once we got to John's house, he gave me a glass of orange juice and vodka. I'm not supposed to drink, you know. I'm only 16. I reminded him, but he persisted. Come on, relax. I'm not going to do anything. Here, you can hold this. And that's when he handed me a gun. Don't worry, it's loaded. He smiled at me. I had never held a gun before, and I definitely did not want to hold it. It was all very uncomfortable and weird. Here, sit down right here. You can help me with my puzzle. He told me, pulling a bench out by a small table. God, you look so sexy with that thing. I sat down at the table, trying to ignore his comments. I sat the gun down and began working on the half-finished puzzle. John put my screwdriver down next to the gun. I was right next to a window, and as I looked outside, I realized it was raining. Logan had texted me that he was on his way, and I was just glad that I would get to leave soon. John was sat on the couch with several guns and a lot of ammunition sitting on the coffee table in front of him. From what I could tell, he was cleaning the guns, but the way the room was set up, he had his back facing me. Logan eventually showed up, and we had about 20 minutes until the movie started. Well, we better get going, Logan said, motioning for me to follow him. Just as I got up, John pointed to the kitchen. Why don't you stay for a drink? You have time before the movie starts, right? Before either of us could protest, he patted the spot next to him, getting up and soon returning from the kitchen with a mixed drink for Logan. Okay, just one, I guess. He agreed, which turned into two, which turned into three. Not by Logan's choice, but because John was so insistent. Okay, the movie just started. If we get there fast, we might make it before the commercials end. Logan got up, grabbing his keys. You really think you should drive right now? Logan, you've been drinking. John chuckled before taking the keys out of his hand. Stay here for a while. I would feel awful if you got into an accident. Please? He begged. Logan and I exchanged a concerned look before sitting back down. Okay, we'll stay until the next showing, I guess. I said to them both, forcing a smile. Do you guys want to see something? John asked, and we nodded hesitantly. He brought out a small safe and struggled to unlock it for about 10 minutes. He even made me try because he liked watching me struggle to open it up. I'm going to make you two rich. Look, he said once we finally got it open. The safe was full of $2 bills, $1 coins. Cool stuff, but nothing of real value. He handed us both 2 Sacagawea coins each, claiming that they would put us through college. Neither of us were buying it, but we went along with it, thanking him. My father collected coins, so I knew a small amount of information about them, and I assumed that John was just confused. Then he pulled out a Nebraska Centennial gun. It was gold-plated and had a mother-of-pearl handle. He pointed it at the wall and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. Whoops, glad that wasn't loaded. John chuckled before putting it down and using his hands to spread the coins in various forms of currency around the table. He did that for a while, scooping up coins and letting them fall between his fingers. You guys should go get some drugs. I don't care. Anything. John told us. His eyes widened. Logan and I saw this as an opportunity and took it. Sure, we'll go do that. We'll be back soon, Logan replied, grabbing his keys. Once we got into his car, we both breathed a sigh of relief. We decided to go to Michael's house to tell him about all the weird shit that had just happened. We got there, and after telling him everything, Michael got a text on his phone. It's from John, he said slowly. He said, don't trust them. They're liars and bad people. They're evil. They're using me. Me and Logan just looked at each other. Us? Is he talking about us? I asked, getting concerned. Yeah, I think so. He keeps repeating the same thing. I have like 15 texts from him. Michael told us, showing us his screen. Shit. Logan said, his eyes getting wide. I forgot my phone at his house. Me and Michael looked at each other. Do you want us to go with you? What do we do? Michael asked. Go and say that my mom wanted me home and so you ended up dropping me off at my house but you forgot your phone. Say we couldn't find any drugs for him. We looked for a while and that's why it took so long. We couldn't call him to let him know because you left your phone and mine is out of service. I instructed trying to come up with the best excuse that I could. Logan left and about 40 minutes later he came back. He's literally crazy. I got there, gave him the excuse and got my phone. He was just sitting in the chair looking at me. Then he got up and hugged me. He wouldn't let go for like 10 minutes. He kept saying that he loves me and I'm his best friend. Logan told us and we all decided there's something wrong with John. We never went back to his house, but John began acting weird at work. Erratic, jumping from happy to sad randomly. He quit a few months later, and the last time we heard was that he moved to Tennessee. I looked him up on the Mugshots website and found an arrest record. It was from 2013. The charge was listed as assault W/INJ FV/Brown COCRT. The most prominent conversation I remember having with him was when he said that he wished me and him could run off together, rob banks, kill people, and have a lot of sex. In his words, he said I could be the Bonnie to his Clyde, that I'm the woman of his dreams. I was 16.